So I've not done a video for a while. What day are we on? 5th of May. 5th of May. I know that it would have been my grand's birthday today. Should have been 117. So, bit of a breakthrough. Had my first appointment at Neurology last week at Tameside Hospital. Man, this last few months has aged me. The amount of like extra white hairs. So I was just expecting it to just be like initial consultation. Sat down, he showed me the results of the brain scan I had in 2024, the CT scan, and with contrast, which doesn't show like a completely full picture of like every single sort of neurological condition, but accurate enough to know that like structure of my brain is perfectly intact. I was given a diagnosis of FND, Functional Neurological Disorder. I was thinking this through, and I think if you'd asked me out of 10 how much I accepted that by the time like I left the appointment on the spot, but definitely by the time I left the appointment, 9 out of 10. And I think the only reason I say 9 out of 10 was that additional one is like just probably the shock of actually coming out with like a diagnosis that I'd never even heard of. And I just wasn't expecting it, but the sheer relief and fortune at knowing that like it isn't something structural, you can't put value on that. That literally was like taking a boot off my neck. Definitely for the first time in about 3-4 months. It explains a whole lifetime. I think as far back as I can remember. So really, like, there's memories I have before that, but like from about sort of 4 onwards. Get it? I get it. So it's not like an actual structural issue, but it's like it's a wiring issue. So it's like a piano coming from the factory mistuned, or like a hypersensitive amygdala that basically has been wired like to the highest volume setting, like straight from the factory. And I think when you look at cases of like childhood trauma and how that wires the brain, that's specifically what you're looking at. When it gets to the degree that like the person appears with like neurological symptoms that resemble cerebral palsy, MS, aspects of Parkinson's, aspects of having a stroke, epilepsy, wild, absolutely wild. So I remember, like, I go back to, say, like age 4, 3, 4, wherever I go walking with mum, like, to be constantly like, pick your fucking feet up, stop dragging your feet. Do you want special shoes? I'll get you special shoes. I'm not criticising my mum. I'm not, because, like, he's difficult. Like, he's been so difficult to understand. It has taken me 45 and a half years to get to this stage. And I am so lucky that I did not go through the rigmarole that a lot of other people do with this. Because a lot of people are treated for MS, for Parkinson's, for epilepsy, etc., etc. They're generally sort of understood as like having mainly psychological issues, which is true to some extent. But I think what I like about it is there's a leading expert on the condition who, as far as I understand, I think he played a key role in it being redefined from what was known as conversion therapy, not conversion therapy, conversion disorder, to functional neurological disorder. And most adults have some form of like functional disorder, whether that's like migraine or whatever, or like a tremor or something like that. Um, so I kind of go back to that age, and like that is from that age, like physically, my frame started like really warping in on itself. Inflected right hip, right foot and leg pointing inwards, left foot sort of crossing over, scissoring almost, like to sort of counterbalance me. Knock kneed, bow legged, variety of sort of gaits, whether that's like a tactic sort of shuffling, um, or like Bambi on ice, which, oh my god, if you want to laugh, like me on ice skates was like terrifying. Walking on my feet's like hard enough. So, I got to like about 7, 8, started creaking and cracking everywhere, every joint. Noticed like my sensory symptoms of like double vision, etc., were like getting worse and worse. Visual snow, tinnitus, really, really hypersensitive, hyper emotional, compulsively like drawn towards like thinking. Couldn't sleep until I'd literally like burned myself into the ground, struggle to sleep, day in, day out, repeat. Um, a lot really started going wrong for me from about the age of like 8.5, when my maternal grandfather died. Um, that just changed my world. I'm not going to go like sort of too deep into like the psychological side of things, because I think we've all got like our sort of story to tell. Um, so yeah, I was under a lot of pressure as like an only child to succeed, and my parents both went through like a breakdown. Like we lost like both grandparents within like 6 months. My dad had like the most fucked up childhood, and his mum did as well. So I was asking the neurologist about epigenetic links, and he just like leans forward and he's like, "Tell me more." So my gran grew up, probably 45 minutes away from Auschwitz, in Poland, and in 1939, when the Nazis sort of rolled in, she witnessed unspeakable horror. My dad described like some of the stuff she described, and I'm not even going to mention it because it's fucked up, and that literally will like scar a person for life, epigenetically change them. So when I asked that and he leaned in and I explained this, from like 1939, and how my dad came into the world as well, the circumstances of that, and like the shit he had to live with. There's a 100-year chain, basically. Well, not 100 years, like from 1939 to 2026. My gran was actually born in 1926. So I think that's kind of where I was drawing a 100-year cycle. Um, but there's an 87-year cycle, really, of like functional neurological disorder from like a familial sort of genetic point of view. And all three generations have like lived in the shadow of like the same trauma. So I came out not just with a diagnosis, like for me, but like for my dad and his mum as well, because all three of us are so easy to misinterpret. We've barely known ourselves. I think it took me until January 2026, end of January 2026, to truly begin to understand myself to a degree that my smartphone didn't know more about me than I did. God, I've been such a mystery to myself, and that has been so, and others, and that has been so painful. It really has, because like it's come with a lot of highs, but it's come with some fucking crushing lows when people think you're not the person you were or that they got with. Well, I'm a fucking hall of mirrors, so I was never going to be one thing anyhow. And like most of what people work from and build from is just a projection anyhow. So I can understand them being like terrified of that hall of mirrors, though. Fucking, how do you think I feel living inside myself? Like I've been shit scared of myself for 45 and a half years, the vast majority of it, and I understand why now. So it doesn't rule everything out. Like there is potential that it could be temporal lobe epilepsy, but I look back on it now, and with the trauma that I've been through, I see how from like a really, really early age, I've been in like this dreamlike state most of the time. That could be temporal lobe epilepsy. Personally, think FND explains that because the degree to which you can dissociate based on like the complexity of like going through trauma. Get it? Get it? So, you know, it requires further scans to see exactly where like the hot electrical sort of activity is going on in my noggin. But I think even with just FND, I think that could be enough to explain that sheer relationship with precognition and synchronicity alone doesn't necessarily mean it has to be epilepsy. We'll see. We'll see. But like, I asked my neurologist, I said, like, look, am I safe to drive? And he's like, yes, you are. And the thing is, coming to understand what it is. So this is where it kind of stumped me for like a few days because I'm thinking, well, if it isn't structural, then like, why is the right hand side of my body weak? Why am I struggling to walk? Why do I feel like I'm struggling in some ways to drive? Because like the right hand side of my body is like a bit weaker. So with it being a slightly bigger car, you know, and needing to drive it differently, and it actually having half decent suspension, so I'm not clinging onto the steering wheel. I described it as like having no longer driving a shit box to the neurologist when he asked me like what my concerns were and just that kind of clinging on, like leaning forward. They said, no, you're safe. You're fine. You know, obviously I do need to report this to FND, to DVLA and to my insurer, but it shouldn't necessarily mean that I'm suspended from driving. So yeah, I think I can explain. There's different angles and mechanisms you can look at experiences you have with different lenses. So from a neurological perspective and psychological perspective, the way I have ended up wired through that trauma, I would not blame anybody for dissociating at times into like their own reality. I understand like from that medical point of view, like that is what they say it is. Whereas you can look at it things from like a more mystical sort of perspective that like the experience itself is just as real as like the diagnostic label is, because if you cling to either one of them, you're not truly seeing things for what they are, because everything is many things. So even if like you're absolutely certain it is one thing, you have to at least sort of be able to accept the possibility that there could be a different means or lens that offers another explanation for it. So that's just kind of where I'm at. I'm not fighting it. I think if you fight a diagnosis like this, I mean, if the diagnosis clearly is wrong, yeah, fair enough. But I think it makes sense of a lot. But it's wild to think that, like, the more stressed out I've got, the worse it's made things. which, okay, that is easy. That's the easy part to sort of understand. The interesting thing is, this is dysregulation, a disorder of autonomic movement. So the movements that you choose to make. It's not a disorder of involuntary movement, which you say that to people and they're like, what the fuck? Because this is where people get that whole, you're putting it on, like, it's an act, it's all in your head. But it is in your head. But I think, like, there's Professor John Stone, like the sort of expert who has done a lot of work into the condition. Like, I think he points out that is just complete bullshit. It's just nonsense on stilts, really, because, I think can't be purely sort of psychological, because that psychological projection comes from like a physical sort of item, how your body processes. So to say it's all in your head and not physical is just makes no sense. So I think seeing it from that angle kind of explains things. So I have a proprioceptive deficit in terms of lacking awareness of like where my body is in relation to where I think it is. When I lose awareness of, say, you put me in a pitch black room with no sound, and I just feel like a floating consciousness with no idea where my arms or my legs are, or any part of me really is. That's very difficult for people necessarily to get their head round, because I think a lot of people walk with certainty of like where their body's going to go, and I've never had that. I've always felt like there's been a confusion of sort of movement from like one side to the other. That's how I understand it now. It has become like a functional sort of disorder. But again, in terms of like dissociation, so like FND can cause such profound issues that it not only, in my case, affects proprioception, but it affects interoception and exteroception. So it distorts both your inner and outer world, and explains all of like my sensory symptoms: visual snow, diplopia, double vision, which is so uncomfortable at times. But I'll come back to that one because I had an interesting sort of result with that today. But yeah, I understand like perceptually, like that wiring basically like screws up everything. Body, external perception, internal perception, perception of body. That's a serious sort of disability that is misunderstood. Yet this condition can, not always, but like there seem to be decent success rates in like really improving it, and in some cases actually remission. Quite how that's affected then by like further periods of stress. Although if you use the strategies prescribed, which I'll come to, it's wild what you can retrain in the brain, which then affects like all manner of function, obviously. So yeah, as like time's gone on, like I mean, I was always like really uncoordinated as like a kid and a teenager playing sports, despite loving them. Immense amount of like physical pain, huge amount. Which from like my 30s onwards, like I've just been a wreck. A burned out wreck that's been really physically, really physically ill in a lot of ways, neurologically ill, mentally. It's been a punishing ride, because I mean that sort of depression and existential sort of dread, etc., and anxiety like as a person that just consumed me from within as a kid. It just shows the level of like what sort of childhood trauma sort of does to a person. But I think in cases of FND as well, part of the trauma actually becomes the experience itself, the physical and the sensory, and the combination of that, and how it becomes very difficult for the person to understand that, and other people to understand that. And I think I can pretty easily say that like I confuse the shit out of people the more they get to know me. I think I initially come across as like so able. Like the first impression I'm capable of making, I think, is where my capabilities are potentially, but I've never been able to apply them sort of consistently, and that then leads to this sort of dichotomy of a person, you know, that becomes anathema to themselves really and everyone else. Went through a lot as like a teenager. I think like most people do. It really screwed me up. Really screwed me up. Again, I'm not going to get too deep into that side of things. Um, it is just saying maybe to highlight to other people in that kind of situation that like if that has also been your experience, yeah, I get where you're coming from. Um, you know, I struggle to function around like the people I'm closest to. I struggle to function being in my own company at times. So like, I'm draining. I drain myself. It's very tiring, and I keep myself away from other people to keep me sort of level, or from getting like too sort of. So it's been a journey. Really has. It's kicked the shit out of me. When I look back at like the mess I was in when like I presented with like a back injury in November, start of November last year. Did my back in like last couple of days of October. Man. So basically, like there was like the trigger for everything to like re-emerge. Be interesting to see where like concussion sort of damage fits in. I think there may well be subtle sensitivities that have sort of become further sensitive, further sensitized rather. But I'm not getting sort of too caught up in that because I think it fits within the overall picture. I think it's just I'm not saying FND was like prodromal to concussion sort of emerging it, because that's not the case. I think it emerged like early on in childhood, and one thing's compounded another, and concussions, two of them at 17 and 22, like just made everything so much worse. And I've just struggled to find any sort of anchor in like the adult world since being an adult, because like that first and the second concussion just fucked me up really badly. Like I've struggled with like depersonalization, derealization, etc., and what I now understand as being explainable as dissociation, um, from very early on, very early doors. Just in that kind of, you know, just like world of my own, just gaze, just that sort of liminal state. Um, I don't know. I get it. Um, but yeah, you know, things steadily just worsen and have just become unmanageable this last like 15 years, 12 years in particular. Definitely 12 years. Like, I think I've done pretty well to actually hold on. Thank fuck I held on until like this stage, because like I can actually now aspire to a quality of life that I have never afforded myself, and I am actually I've been such a bastard to myself. I have been the J.K. Simmons whiplash of all bullies to myself based on how this has fucked my head up and what it's done to me. I can look the camera in the uh, in the eye with a smile on my face, but like this has ripped me apart. Applying for universal credit and PIP and documenting all this has literally like been a life review of trauma, with some moments of just exquisite beauty, a lot of moments. So it's not all bad, but like I have had to find those positives in like what has been. We can't get caught up comparing our life to anyone's. I've really struggled, and I think the fact that I'm still here, I have no idea, other than sheer. Even when I've been beaten, I've still carried on and found a way to my feet. So anybody else sort of plugging along with like these kind of issues, whether you've got a neurological disorder or not, like understand I've wanted to give up like every step of the way. I have. But I've got to a stage where like I've literally never thought I'd do it. Never did. But literally I've been able to make sense of like my entire life. Probably because I've seen every part of it smashed apart like in front of me on the floor, and I've had to like sweep it up and put it back together. Understand it though. And that gives me hope. So I can say it with a smile on my face now, but like this has just destroyed my life. Like my quality of life has been piss poor. And I've been such a bastard to myself whilst being so loving towards other people. And I'm finally finding a way of showing myself that kindness, so that I can smile about. So yeah, late 30s, really, really really physically struggling. Like mental health was just an absolute disaster, really, up until where it always has been. Always has been. It's improved in degrees, I would say, over the last like 7, 8 years. Like I've worked so hard at it. Maybe divorce kind of does that to you around about that age, late 30s, early mid 40s, 50, whatever. You're assessing like the second half of your life as well and how the first half applies. And literally, it's what I've known. I couldn't face myself until that age. There was just too much. But it was easier just to concentrate on other people to actually take me out of myself. And I don't mean that in the sense that I used people. I've always loved people. Whilst fucking despising myself. But there's hope going forward. So, say from about 40 onwards, like physically, I have just completely fallen off a cliff to the stage where I would class myself as like moderately disabled, in some ways heavily, psychologically. Series of wild experiences, over I would say like last 9 months, 12 months, probably a bit longer actually. Last few years, who am I kidding? But I think it's how that inward journey, I think that manifests like a lot of stuff in your life that you then got to find some way of like coming to terms with or understanding for me, I think the best way to understand it is like symbolically, like what does it represent? What's it trying to tell you? It's a language that you've just got to figure out for yourself. I don't have the answers for anyone else necessarily, but I've had to figure this out for myself. Um, but yeah, presented with a back injury in last November that just was horrific, and that flared up all of the FND symptoms, which included like just such severe vestibular ataxia. It was like it just basically reawoke concussion. So I've been walking around in a funk like for months, like I've been twatted. Um, it's a horrible feeling. Horrible feeling when I look at like the sheer chaos of like what I've been doing this last few months. Just disordered, lack of memory of pretty much anything along the way, or being able to pluck it out in an order, being able to retain what I've done on any day, what I've just said, done, where I've put anything, barely having the energy to prepare a meal, meals that I do prepare, like just getting distracted, boiling over a pan of like porridge. That's about the most advanced cooking I've been able to do. And for somebody who has loved cooking and is very able, um, a good cook, to not be able to have the energy to do that's been just shit as well. And my life has just revolved around food this last few months. I've sort of had such a metabolic spike that like I've genuinely needed around about 4,000 calories a day, 3,500 to 4,000, just about to maintain weight. And I would say, if anything, maybe this last month, I've just got to a stage where I've just eaten everything in sight, and not really, really bad stuff, but too much, and like that sort of messed me up as well. And I have gained weight, but so obviously, that I presented with this back injury, was referred to physio, told it was mechanical back pain, knew there was way more going on than that. A few weeks after that, started with this horrific right hand sided like neck injury. That was like somebody had like tried ripping my head and like my arm out at the same time. Whiplash, in essence, with no cause. Went to see it was a paramedic at my GP surgery, and she's like, my God, that's stiff. Well, thank you. It was horrible, absolutely horrible. I knew there was something wrong, and I tried saying to her, and I think I pissed her off at the end of the appointment because there wasn't time to deal with it. She could clearly see I was struggling, but like towards the end of the appointment, I just got so animated because I was trying to express that like I know something's going on, and like I just need somebody to listen to me. And I'm not saying she was being horrible either, but like she had limited time. So the cruel thing of I think about it with many things is like how long it can sometimes take you to put something together, like a bigger picture, that you can make sense of, or somebody can look at and say, yeah, I think I've got an idea of what direction we need to look with this. A couple of weeks after that, I sent a triage to my GP surgery requesting like neurological assessment like I had done in 2022 when I knew I had like right hand sided weakness. I'd been through such a stressful period and I didn't understand quite how that then triggered off like just all the FND symptoms basically would just come out. Like it's like getting all the toys out of the cupboard instead of like a few at a time. And during those periods, every day is a battle. You do not know which battle or cluster of symptoms or all of them. What you're going to face. So I'd sent this triage to the the GP surgery, got a call from a GP, discussed the symptoms, and she said, yeah, it sounds really like you need to come in and we need to sort of assess what's going on. Have you tried, like any support aids or anything like that? Because at the time, it just mirrored cerebral palsy, mirrored it, that and post-concussion syndrome. So I hadn't tried like things like orthotic supports other than like inserts, which didn't really make too much of a difference. They weren't proper ones. I think if anything, I kind of almost needed like orthopedic proper, like properly orthopedic heeled shoes. So basically, I put together just this entire medical history, which took me about 10 days to put together. 40 pages long timeline. Oh my god, that was horrible. Like seeing every fucked up thing you've been through, how it's affected your physiological function and neurological function and cognitive function and so on and so on. And I was asked to come in and see the GP. So I'd gone and bought these knee supports and ankle supports from Aldi. Put them on and I thought, oh my god, I can actually walk properly for the first time like in my life. Went on this walk, came back, took the ankle and the knee supports off. I couldn't walk properly. It felt like my hip was like it was trying to dislocate from the socket. Oh man, my knees, my ankles, like everything really hurt in my legs. My appointment was at the GP's the following day. So I turned up literally walking like someone with cerebral palsy, what you would expect of somebody with spastic diplegia, which is almost like a form of paralysis of movement in gait, quite often with like a scissoring sort of gait. And my GP was like, are you always like this? And it's like, well, varying degrees of balance and coordination tests we did, and I'm like involuntarily reaching out to balance, just taking my shoes off, and he's like, is that common? And I'm like, dual tasking, so tasks involving like both hands mirroring movements or all four limbs. I just get so confused in movement. I've never been able to like mirror rhythm and stuff like that and movements from somebody else, so that showed up immediately. Reaction tests, fine. But I'd been so manic, and I knew it, but like I just felt unable to stop, and it's pure stress response. Mum being diagnosed with incurable cancer. That sparked me into mania. Did my back in. That presented all the FND symptoms, all of them. Had to leave my job. I was on the sick, had to leave my job. Apply for benefits. No certainty over like neurologically what was going on. So all the grounds to like implode as a person, in it, or just tank, just sink out of like sheer stress, which is what it did to me. Oh my gosh, I was so depressed, so low. Things just went from bad to worse, and I think it just not knowing what was going on, whilst my body was like, I was just getting steadily like more and more disabled, like crippled with what were like palsy-like symptoms. Benefits application. I had to do like a revised version of like that document I provided like to my GP, because I've been able to contextualize it and make a lot more sense of it since. So that has been really punishing. That's where it really unearthed a lot of what I wasn't able to see when I presented that document to the doctors. So I started this document, I think it was around about the 23rd of March. I'm still not done. I think it's currently at about 50 pages and about 40 odd thousand words. So this basically, when I fill in my universal credit forms, my PIP ones, whether they like it or not, probably going to get about a 50-page document of a timeline of like how I think the FND started, degree to which it's affected me all through life, and how that in itself is such a complex form of psychological trauma that is why it warps my body to the degree it does. So it's been really traumatic, and that document itself is, I think at last count, I think it was probably about 110 hours in like editing time alone, not just document open, editing time. So that basically, the answers that I give on my universal credit and PIP forms basically are going to be reference linked to relevant page numbers and paragraphs. And that's the degree to which, like, forensically, I have had to understand myself. Whether they want it or not, they're getting it, because this, for me, been a literal mystery to myself for 45 and a half years. And if you don't know what that feels like, I can't put a word to it. So it's necessary, to quote Cooper. It is. This literally is me. I tell you what, from a point of view of like the sheer vestibular ataxia I have had, and how concussed and punch drunk I have felt from being spun around, it literally is Cooper docking that ship. It is necessary though, and the weight of it has ripped me apart. But I could not have gone to Citizens Advice Bureau and documented all of this and gone through the trauma of surfacing that much, and I need to understand it. So that's what I'm going to do with PIP and universal credit in terms of providing that level of evidence, along with like a diary of symptoms as well. So they're going to get a lot of evidence. You know, I thought pre-diagnosis, you know, I knew I had to provide a lot of weight to them as to how this affects me and how profoundly. Even post-diagnosis, I still need to explain how that affects me because it is so misunderstood. And that is how my symptoms are capable of varying to a degree which I need to explain to them how and why it varies, because it's an autonomic movement. It is a voluntary movement disorder, not an involuntary one. So there's some interesting techniques I've come across. Really, there's two means of approaching this in terms of recovering. One is from the psychological aspect. The second is from like the physical. Both tie into each other. They do. It's very interesting, having been diagnosed with like a neurological condition, that actually the way it's wired me is as much of a disadvantage as it has been as much of a disadvantage as it is now an advantage to me to recover from. based on how self-aware and analytical, hyper-analytical I can be. So my body has been trying to tell me for years, in really strange ways, it's been trying to reinforce proprioception. So from an early age, I used to go walking with my parents. I used to love going off and like running up hills. So that's clue one. Did a lot of cycling from in like my 20s and early 30s. Always used to like having a really heavy bike. Really heavy bike, particularly with a coil shock, because it gives like a more linear, progressive sort of rebound. Struggled on a hardtail. Always felt like I was just being bounced everywhere. So where I really succeeded, terrible on like downhills. Terrible. I was so like rigid and like afraid and just couldn't relax and move. I've actually started to be able to flow much better and relax with that, probably in the last 5 or 8 years, I think. So that I found interesting actually. I always used to particularly love uphill climbs, particularly on a really heavy bike, which is a little bit like the hill walking thing. So I'd just literally just drop it in. I wouldn't even need to actually drop it into the granny cog on like a really steep hill on like say like a twin front cog sort of crank. I could sometimes leave it in like the hardest of like my front sort of front cogs, um, and just go into this sort of metronomic like breathing and rhythm pattern, and I just literally just zigzag the way up the hill. I was always determined to like hit a climb first. And given like how much I struggled on like downhills and like sections with roots and stuff like that, anything that could kind of make the bike squirrely underneath you, I always thought it was really odd that like I really succeeded at climbs because I've got big strong thighs and a strong arse and strong carbs now. Um, so it was kind of next clue. Um, that body blindness, that lack of proprioception, I found like I need a reference to my body to kind of feel like I know where I'm going. But it's interesting because I've spent my entire life so pranged and upset and paranoid about like the way I walk that if anybody comes towards me or from behind me, like whilst I'm walking, I'm just so anxious. So anxious. And I always wondered why, like, it made my movements even worse. And it's that level of awareness. So one of the cunning strategies with FND is basically it's almost to like confuse the body with like slightly abnormal movements, but focused intentional ones in certain sense. So I kind of move in that sense, or I've tried to, and the more sometimes the harder I try, the worse it gets. But I found like some interesting techniques. So I wondered, considering why I feel or have felt so shit this last few months, I suppose I'll backtrack just a little bit. Generally, a lot of people with FND stop walking, stop going out, because the vestibular ataxia is just so severe. That has been the most horrific thing about this last few months. Literally just going out walking, getting up feeling punch drunk, going out walking feeling punch drunk. The sight of anything moving just knocking me sick like water. Anything moving fast. TV, screen, whatever. Scrolling quickly on my phone, just I really haven't felt safe. Really haven't felt safe. And before like I understood it was FND, like I could not work out why, and I felt so unsafe in the flat. Outside the flat, I was getting really nervous about driving, and I'm still only going to keep short distances because I think I'm just doing the right thing. I'm so glad that I carried on pushing myself and getting out. And okay, yeah, I do trip and I stumble and I fall. But I spent my entire life doing that and getting back up on my feet. Or psychologically having the shit kicked out of me and getting back up and on my feet. Never understood where I found the strength from. I'm proud of myself in that sense because like it's taken a lot. So yeah, it's interesting because like generally what they do with FND to help somebody retrain them to like to their autonomic movement is finding ways of getting them to move which actually distract them. So if they enjoy dance, which I never have because I've got two left feet, you get them dancing, get them moving with like dance making. If they like skating, like get them to move in like skating movements, which is really funny because I found that kind of it's difficult to sort of describe and hold the camera. I can't coordinate. It doesn't matter. It's like an ice skating walking movement is essentially sort of what I'm talking about. So when I went for my walk today, when I got to a spot where I was away from sort of where I could be seen, I started moving like that in that sort of ice skating motion, deliberately like cognitively pacing, concentrating on like ball, ball of foot, toes, press, ball, toe, press, each step. And I did that the other day when I went to the top of Monk's Road, that I realised I was on an incline, and quite often when I walk, I lean forward. And I notice when I'm on like really steep slopes, for some reason, it actually feels like that's what I'm geared for. So I found that kind of curious. So I just leaned into it and I noticed that what I was doing was like slow movements that were engaging like the full length of the muscle. And it's like, hang on a minute. I'm retraining the way I move here. I'm actually like finding my own therapy as I go. And my body's always been drawing me towards it. I just didn't understand what it was saying. So I did the same today. That ice skating movement. I found it really interesting because when I got to like a place where that would have been a bit obviously awkward and embarrassing emotion down like a main high street, suddenly noticed like I was actually moving a bit more coordinatedly. So it gets over like the main road, gets out of view of people. It's a little bit of like a climb, same thing. I employed that technique on quite a challenging route. It's wild, man. It was really, really wild. So my left eye, I would describe it as like 720 pixel resolution. I'd describe my right eye as 360 at best, 180, 360, let's say. So that is what causes that diplopia. So I'm noticing that like not only was I actually starting to walk in actually a balanced way, legs straight, feet pointing straight and kind of outwards instead of inwards. Hip wasn't inflected. And I noticed, like, all of a sudden I thought, oh, my eyesight feels really sharp. And effectively, like, that ice skating motion, what I'm doing is, like, because I was using my hands as well, in like a CrossFit skating sort of motion, that's exactly what the type of motions that I need to be making to engage both sides of my body, which then when I reverted to like a normal walk, it's like, hang on a minute, I can actually see an improvement in like mobilized function. And when you've lived 45 years watching your body getting worse and worse and worse, and your sensory symptoms getting worse and worse and worse, and you're told it isn't a structural issue all of a sudden, that it's this condition you've never heard of, but that it can actually be improved through neuropsychiatry, cognitive behavioral therapy, and physical rehabilitation of movements like that. So I have like an ataxic sort of shuffling gait. And the funny thing is, when I was striding in that ice skating movement, I actually noticed I was actually lifting my legs instead of dragging them and catching my heels or catching the front of my feet. I have immense spasticity in my legs, in my calves and my thighs and my shins. I have had huge issues with that throughout life that have just got worse and worse and worse. And I got to the top of the climb with no cramp, no spasticity, legs pointing straight. I turned around from the top of it and I ran down it. Not I fell, I ran down it like a fell runner. So today's been a victory dance. So, to anybody else like diagnosed with FND, when you see the power of what your brain's done to you, it's terrifying. But there's an alternative, there is a flip side to it. I've seen it, you can taste it too. I'm not saying we can necessarily always completely get ourselves into remission, and it's questionable how like stress flares these things up, but a rolling stone, sort of gathers weight and gathers momentum. And I just found it wild, like an hour after I've gone for a walk, 2 hours, I'm not stretching, I'm not writhing around trying to stretch my muscles out. My eyesight actually feels sort of balanced. So what I've done effectively today is like, it's a start in terms of retraining movement, retraining autonomic movement through distraction. It's wild, absolutely wild. I'm retraining the way I see myself in terms of like, been painful, that PIP and Universal Credit Supporting Document, but it's cathartic as well. I've needed to understand myself. Going forward, like once this is done, I can actually maybe start recovering and wild, actually having a shot at a chance of a quality of life that I have never had. That feels really, really weird. Really, really weird. So it kind of got me thinking about how with like when you've had like a chronic condition, when you've had like no reference to like being well, or you haven't had one in like an incredibly long period of time, or it comes and goes with like no rhyme or reason, or you're struggling to identify sort of triggers, which for me are definitely stress. I've got really broad shoulders, but when it gets too much, I think this is when it really screws things up for me. But man, I have like really seen like the power of the mind today, and it has just been like staggeringly illuminating. Um, so things like gong meditations and binaural beats, hemisync. You know, I've not been able to listen to stuff like that for ages because, like, of just the sheer amount of, like, just how bad my vestibular ataxia has been. Just makes everything, like, sort of quite sickening because I get these spikes in, like, how loud stuff sounds. Everything kind of feels kind of mellow today. So, like, that's very interesting. Very interesting. Once you incrementally start getting wins and you really start to believe in yourself, like the possibilities are just like they're amazing. They're amazing. So like, do not lose hope. And sometimes like we suffer for such a long period of time that we just desperately want to get well. But the interesting thing is, when you've no reference for wellness, sometimes there's actually a fear of being well because it's all you've known to be unwell. And it's easy to start like worrying about like what are the pressures of being well. And like, you know, there's a lot that I think you have to look at and be able to reframe within yourself and ask whether what you were doing before is necessarily like relevant to like going forward. We've got roofs to keep over our head, bills to pay, so it makes this very, 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 very difficult. But just get a strong feeling that like I think my future lies in something creative as opposed to like going back into sort of care work, which loved it, loved it. It's been absolutely amazing. You know, I've never had like kids of my own. I've had the privilege of being a stepdad for like a number of years, but like I think like the care work as well, it kind of gave me like the opportunity to love and nurture like a lot of people, and I've had to learn how to do that to myself. Actually making progress there, bit by bit. I look forward to meeting the man that I potentially could become in like time. I got some ideas like of what I would like to do going forward. Um, and it is along the line of like helping people with like sensory symptoms and that kind of thing. So I'll kind of come to that in time. I think sometimes like you've got to play your cards a little bit close to your chest with like future plans. Um, I think I got like some interesting ideas, but yeah, so it's been a journey. It certainly has. Um, I mean, I kept like video logs of like my journey from like the start of what I thought was neurocognitive burnout in February. Be interesting to look back on those at like what mess I was. But yeah, you know, I've found something in nature that replicates like the effects of like hemisync, gong music, etc. That clicking out, and it's wide field gazing. It's looking without focusing. A bit like when you just find yourself just just gazing without like looking in like a world of your own. You can keep your eyes open for like more than about 30 seconds, walking past like trees, looking up at like canopies within like forests. Something about like that fractal light effect really calms like the vagus nerve and limbic system and just takes you away from like that inner dialogue. So I found like this is, kind of what nature's been doing. My body's been like directing me towards like what it's needed, be that nature or, sort of physical therapy ideas or even my own ideas, psychotherapy wise, because whatever help I do get, ultimately I am the key to that. I've really grown in like self-belief. Like I think, I think there's always some part of me that has known that this moment could come. Never thought it was possible. Just I'm not getting too carried away. All I'm doing is I'm just banking it for the day as a win. Reference to self that, when stuff gets bad, hang on a minute, I got strategies. I got ways of working around this now. Never give up hope.